Hey everyone, in this tutorial we will be going over methods, what they are, and how we can use them in Java programming. So what exactly are methods? Methods are basically chunks of code that run when they are called. Methods help to reuse code and to do a certain process. Let's start with a method declaration. Methods in this Java course will be a standard declaration of the access specifier, and then static or non-static methods, the return type, the method name, and any parameters inside the parentheses. That sounded really complicated, so let's go ahead and see what that looks like in an example. As always, I'm using an online IDE, which will be linked below, but follow along with whatever you use to do Java programming. So, first off, let's create a file called methods.java, where we will be doing the code for today's video. In here, we want to have a standard class and main method declaration. So, public class methods, and inside public static void main string the square brackets args. And now we have a standard class. So let's start with the access specifier. The access specifier is not actually required to create a method, but what it does is it helps for something we will later learn called encapsulation. Some access specifiers include public, private, and protected. For most of this course, all methods that we will write will be public methods. Next up, we have the static versus non-static methods. What it means for a method to be static is that it belongs to the class and not an object of the class. We will discuss objects and classes in future videos, but for now, what it means is that any method that we call from the main method without an object must be static. Again, just follow along as classes and objects will be covered in future videos. Next is the return type of a method. Basically, when we call a method, we have it give us back a value, which is its return type. For example, if I wanted a method to give me the name of a person, the return type would be a string. Also, methods can have a void return type, which means that when we call the method, the code inside the method is executed, but nothing will be given back to us, which is void. Next, we have the method name, which again is similar to variable names, in which we will follow camel case and try to be descriptive with what the method should do. Finally, inside the parentheses of the method, we have what is known as parameters. What this means is that we can give the method some data for it to perform an action. So this code right here is the standard declaration of a method for this Java course. Okay, so we covered a lot of information right now, and to make it have more sense, let's go ahead and see a few examples. Let's try to make a method that will just print out hello there 3 times when we call the method. So first, all the methods will have to be public, so again, we will do this outside the main method to create the method. So public, and then next, we aren't calling it with an object of the class, so we must have the static. And since the method isn't giving us any specific value back, we will have it as void, and we can call it something like hello method. And we don't have any parameters since we're not giving the method any values. So let's go ahead and leave that blank and just add the brackets. So inside, all we're doing is just printing out hello there 3 times. So system.out.println, and inside the parentheses we can say hello there with the semicolon to end the statement, and I'm just going to copy paste this 2 more times. So here we've created a method that when we call it, it should print out hello there 3 times. So we haven't really been talking about how to call a method, so let's go ahead and call this method to see the general format. Since it is a void method, which means it won't return anything, we can call the method by just using the method name followed by the parentheses. So I will be doing hello method followed by the parentheses, and then a semicolon to end the statement. When we compile and run this program, we should just see an output of hello there 3 times. So to compile this, we do java c methods.java and give it a second to compile. And then we do java methods, and we see the expected output of hello there being printed out 3 times. So let's try another few examples, this time with return types and parameters. Let's say that we want to create a method that will give us the name of a person, or return the name of a person. So to do that, the method will be public and static, since we're not calling with an object. Next, since we actually are getting a value back, we will have the return type be a string, since the name is a string. We can call this method getName, and then in the parentheses, we aren't giving the name any value, so we can just leave it blank. And then the brackets to create this method. Any method with a return type must have a return statement, and the return statement will always be the last line inside the method. So let's go ahead and return the name which in this case, let's just call it Santa. And then the semicolon to end this statement. And here we've created a fully functioning method that will return Santa when we call it. So now let's try calling this method. Since we are receiving a value from this method, we can call the method with a different process. Let's go ahead and store the value that we were getting using a variable. Since we're receiving a string, the best way to store it will be using a string, and then let's call it name is equal to get name. Now, since the method actually returns a value, we need to store the value in a variable, which we didn't do for the void method. So let's go ahead and print this out. So system.out.println name. So once we compile and run this, we should see the expected output of printing out Santa. So here when I run the program, we still call the other method, so it'll still print out hello there 3 times, but then we see the expected output of Santa. Also, we can still do other processes within the getName method. It doesn't need to just return the value. For example, let's print out this method has been called every time that we call the method. So above this line, we will do system.out.println this method has been called. And I'm actually not going to call the other method. Instead, I'm going to call this method twice, but each time with a different variable. So I'm going to call this name2 and print name2 out as well. Name2. So when we go ahead and compile and run this, so give it a second to compile. And now when we run it, we should see an output of this method has been called, and then the name that we called, and this method has been called again, along with the name that it returned. Also, we don't actually need to store a variable of the value of the method, and instead, we can just print out the value of the method by directly calling the method when we print it. So here, instead of get name, I'm going to do get name. And same thing here, get name with the parentheses. Make sure you have the parentheses. And then we can delete the lines where we assign values. So when I go ahead and compile this, and when we run it, we get the same output. Feel free to modify your method and try doing other things with it to get a better feel for methods and how they are used. Next, let's try a method with some parameters. Let's create a method called multiply, which takes in 2 ints and returns an int value, which is the product of 2 ints. So to do that, we will again be doing public static, and since it returns the product, we will have int, and let's call it multiply. This time, we will actually be giving the method values known as the parameters. So for the 2 operands that we will be giving it, first we will do an int first. So this is the first operand, and comma int second. So when you have more than one parameter, be sure to use a comma to separate them. So what we've done here is the parameters allow us to use these variables first and second inside the method as values that we will pass in when we call the method. To return the product, all we need to do is just return first times second. When we go ahead and call this method, we need to pass in the values inside the parentheses that match the parameters in the same order and the same data type. For example, let's try printing out the product of 3 and 4 using the multiply method. So here we'll print out multiply, and inside the parentheses we'll put 3, 4. Note that we have 3 and 4 as int data types. Then I will put the semicolon, and let's compile and run this program. And here we actually got an error because I misspelled multiply. Make sure that you match case and the words exactly for the method names and variable names. So if I were to compile this again and run it, we should see the output of 12, which is the product of 3 and 4. Let's create another similar method using the double data type instead that returns the sum of 2 doubles that are passed in. So in this case, we will do public static double, and let's call it add, with double first as a parameter and double second. And here we just want to return the sum of first and second. So return first plus second. Now let's call this method and pass in two doubles. So here let's print out add of 3.0 comma 4.0. And this should have an output of 7.0. So when I compile this and execute the program, we have the expected output of 7.0. So the last topic I want to briefly cover is method overloading. Java allows us to have multiple methods with the same name as long as either the type or number of parameters is different. For example, I could overload the multiply method, where instead of having 2 ints, I could have 3 ints instead. So let's go ahead and do that. So here I'm going to do public static int multiply, where I have int first, int second, and int third as parameters. Again, we will just be returning the product of all three of these numbers, so first times second times third. When we compile this, and let's go ahead and print out the product for 3, 4, and 5. So this should actually have an output of 60. So when I compile this, and give it a second to compile, and let's run it, we have an expected output of 60. I could also overload this method by doing it for two doubles rather than two ints, because right now we cannot pass two doubles, because we only have methods that work for ints. So let's go ahead and create another multiply method. So public static, this time the product of two doubles will be a double. So public static double multiply with double first and double second as the parameters. And then we will again be returning first times second. Let's go ahead and print out the output of this method. So I'm just going to copy paste the code and instead change these values to 3.0 and 4.0, both of which are doubles. The output now should be 12.0. So when I go ahead and compile this method, the class, and run the program, we have the expected output of 12.0 when we call the multiply method using two doubles as parameters. In general, methods are great for shortening code when you need to repeat some processes, and they help for code maintainability. As always, the notes and the code used in today's video will be linked in the GitHub below. Further readings and resources about methods will also be linked below as well. If you guys enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe, and check out our website for more information for your coding journey.